Imagine this scenario, okay, and tell me if it sounds familiar. You have a friend, someone who works really hard, got a good job, earning a decent income.
Yeah, sounds pretty standard.
You'd probably think, okay, they're set, right, financially secure.
Yeah.
But then, boom, life throws a curveball.
Uh-huh.
They separate from their partner, and suddenly, even with that job, they're facing like huge financial pressure. Their whole financial world just gets turned upside down.
It happens more often than you'd think.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? We just sort of assume if you're earning, you're totally self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
But is earning money always enough to be, all set?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the 15,000 rupee question in this context.
Exactly. And that's precisely the question we're tackling today. We are diving deep into a really recent, frankly, groundbreaking decision from the Bombay High Court in India.
Yeah, this one just became public, June 26th, 2025.
That's the one.
Mm-hmm.
And it seriously challenges some long-held ideas about financial support after separation, especially for working women.
It really does. What's so interesting, I think, is how it forces us to look again at what financial independence actually means inside a marriage and, maybe more importantly, after it ends.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to really unpack this specific ruling. We want to get into the nitty-gritty as why it's such a big deal.
Right. Why this particular case is making waves. And then look at the broader picture. What does it mean for, financial fairness and modern relationships overall?
What are the real-world consequences for individuals and for how the law thinks about marriage and money going forward?
Let's get into it. This decision from Bombay, it's a significant one.
It really is. So June 18th, 2025, the Bombay High Court, Justice Manjusha Deshpande presiding, made this landmark ruling.
And it wasn't just tinkering around the edges. They upheld a family court order from back in August 2023.
That original order, right, said the husband had to pay around $15,000 a month in maintenance to his estranged wife. Pretty standard stuff so far, maybe.
But here's the twist. This is where it gets really interesting and kind of turns expectations on their head.
Go on.
The wife, she wasn't unemployed. Not at all. She was actually working, earning over Rs. 25,000 every month.
Right, so this isn't the typical scenario of one person being completely dependent. She had her own income, a fairly substantial one.
Exactly, a working woman.
So naturally, the husband challenged this. Vigorously, apparently.
You can imagine. His argument probably seemed pretty straightforward to him and maybe to a lot of people.
His point was basically, she's working, she's earning over 25K. Why does she need my money?
Right. Why the maintenance? Plus, he brought up his own financial situation.
Yeah, he mentioned supporting his ailing parents, said they had a pension of Rs. 28,000 a month, and argued his own earnings weren't really high enough to cover this maintenance payment easily.
On paper, it sounds like a reasonable defense, doesn't it? She earns, he has obligations.
It does, but that leads us to the core of the ruling, the why behind it. And this is where the court's thinking really becomes clear.
Okay, so how did the High Court respond?
They dismissed his appeal. Firmly. They made a really crucial point. A woman being employed doesn't automatically cancel out her right to maintenance.
So that's the key. Employment isn't an automatic disqualification.
Exactly. It's a major shift from just looking at employed versus unemployed. The court is saying just because you have an income doesn't mean you don't need support or aren't entitled to it when a marriage ends.
It's a more nuanced view, not so black and white.
Definitely not. And what really stood out to me, reading the judgment, was the court's focus on the income disparity, the gap between their earnings.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, like we said, she earned over RSS 25,000, but the husband, his reported earnings were, according to the wife's claim, which the court seemed to accept, over RSA's 1 lakh monthly.
Wow. Okay, so more than 4 times her income. That's quite a difference.
A huge difference. And the court saw that as absolutely central. It wasn't just a minor detail. It spoke volumes about his ability to pay, regardless of his other claims.
Right. That kind of disparity puts his financial burden argument in a different light, and it brings up that fundamental question: what does the court consider sufficient income?
Exactly. Because the court specifically noted that even with her RS 25,000 plus SERI, her income wasn't enough for her to maintain her pre-separation standard of living.
The standard of living argument. That's crucial in maintenance cases.
Absolutely. The court looked at her reality. A long commute, living with her parents and brother. They actually called that setup unsustainable long-term for someone used to a different lifestyle during the marriage.
So it wasn't just about the numbers on a payslip. It was about the quality of life, the established lifestyle, and whether she could realistically maintain something similar on her own income.
Precisely. It's about dignity, about practicality.
Right.
And they didn't just look at her situation.
They looked closely at his claims, too, I assume, about supporting his parents.
They did. They scrutinized his claim about the Rs. 28,000 pension for his parents. While acknowledging it, they found no real proof of other major financial responsibilities that would make paying the Rs. 10,000 maintenance genuinely difficult, especially given his much higher income.
So they looked past the claim to the actual financial capacity.
Yes, it suggests they wanted concrete evidence, not just assertions, particularly when his income was significantly higher.
And this approach, how does it fit with existing Indian law, like the Hindu Marriage Act or the CRPC?
Well, according to the analysis, it aligns quite well. Those laws already require courts to consider both the wife's needs and the husband's ability to pay.
So it's not creating new law out of thin air, but rather applying existing principles in a way that reflects modern reality.
Exactly. It's a holistic view. It moves away from a simplistic, is she earning, yes-no checklist to a more comprehensive assessment of what's fair in that specific situation. Trying to ensure the economic fallout of separation doesn't just crush one party.
That makes sense. So thinking bigger picture now, what are the wider implications? This sounds like a pretty significant precedent.
Huge. It sends a clear message. Having a job doesn't automatically mean a woman forfeits her right to seek financial support after separation.
And legal experts think this might encourage more working women to actually seek maintenance.
That's the suggestion, yeah. Knowing the courts will look beyond just the employment status to the whole picture, living costs, the previous lifestyle, the income gap, it empowers women to ask for what might be rightfully theirs based on the marital standard.
It represents a real shift in legal thinking then. It's interesting to see how this compares globally.
Right. Is this happening elsewhere?
It kind of is. I mean, if you look at places like the US or the UK, spousal support or alimony often considers the need to maintain the marital standard of living as much as possible.
Okay.
They look at both parties' resources, earning potential, the length of the marriage. It's a complex calculation. So this Bombay High Court ruling seems to bring Indian law more in line with that kind of nuanced global approach.
Moving away from maybe a more traditional view where a working woman was seen as entirely self-sufficient, regardless of the circumstances of the marriage or the separation.
Precisely. It acknowledges the economic realities are more complex than that.
And it really makes you think about, how society's views on gender roles and money are changing, or maybe how the law is catching up to those changes.
Yeah, definitely. The traditional model often assumed female financial dependence. But today, even with more women working, we still have issues like
The gender pay gap. Women often earning less even for similar work.
right, and career breaks, often taken by women for childcare or family reasons, which can impact their long-term earning power significantly.
And the whole double burden thing, juggling a job and the lion's share of home and family responsibilities.
Yeah. The court acknowledging these underlying factors, implicitly or explicitly, is a big step. It recognizes that simply having an income doesn't erase these systemic disadvantages.
It's about what that income can actually do in terms of maintaining a life, especially after a separation.
Exactly, looking beyond the number to the reality.
Let's try and make this really concrete. Imagine a hypothetical couple, okay? Let's call them Priya and Rohan.
Okay.
Married 10 years. Priya's a teacher, earns, say, Rs. 30,000 a month. Rohan's a software engineer, pulling in Rs. 1.5 lakh monthly.
Big difference there, too. 5 times the income.
Right. They separate. Now, Priya's 30K on its own maybe isn't bad, but try running a separate household, covering kids' expenses, maybe trying to maintain something close to the life they had. It suddenly feels very tight.
Especially compared to the lifestyle they likely had with Rohan's much higher income contributing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So under this Bombay High Court ruling, what happens to Priya?
Well, based on this precedent, she'd have a strong case for maintenance. The court would look at that massive income gap, her likely role in childcare, the standard of living she was used to.
And conclude that despite her own job and income, she needs support from Rohan to maintain a reasonable standard, especially for herself and the kids.
Precisely. It shows the real-world impact. It's not just theoretical. It affects people's ability to actually live decently after marriage ends. It shifts the focus towards genuine financial equity.
And it highlights those unique hurdles working women often face, that pay gap we mentioned. It's real. It limits self-sufficiency.
And those career breaks for family, they have long-term financial consequences that don't just disappear because the marriage ends.
So this ruling is saying maintenance isn't just about whether you can work, but whether your earnings allow you to maintain a dignified standard of living comparable to the one you had.
Yes. And looking forward, you could see this influencing future calculations. Maybe courts will start looking even closer at things like,
Commuting costs, childcare expenses specifically.
yeah, or even the impact of inflation eroding the value of that maintenance over time. It kind of opens the door for a much more detailed, realistic assessment of need.
So wrapping this up,
Oh.
what's the big takeaway here? This Bombay High Court ruling from June 2025.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than just one case, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a powerful statement about financial fairness when a marriage ends. It clearly says a woman's job doesn't automatically mean she gets no support.
Especially when there's a big income difference,
Mm.
or the standard of living established during the marriage can't be maintained on her income alone. It accepts that having a job doesn't put everyone on equal footing financially.
Right. And it's grounded in existing law, but interpreted through a modern lens, reflecting how society is evolving. It sets a really important benchmark.
It definitely pushes the conversation forward, doesn't it?
Hmm.
About gender roles, financial rights, and ensuring separation doesn't disproportionately disadvantage one partner, particularly wives who work, but maybe earn less or carry other burdens.
It's a step towards a more equitable system, recognizing the complexities of 21st century finances and relationships.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on, I think, for all of us, really. In today's world, with finances being so complicated and intertwined, how do we personally and as a society redefine what's financially fair when a relationship changes or ends?
What does financial independence truly mean in that context? And what responsibilities, what financial commitments carry over even after the romantic part is over?
It's definitely something to think about. What are those continuing obligations that partnerships create, even after they dissolve? A provocative thought to end on.